a little bit later on. So, welcome everyone to the day three of our program. And today we have personally one of my favorite presentations that we have. And the presentation is going to be by Matthew Graveau, who's a CEO of the Canary One, who's a strategy, M&A, and innovation expert with a background in market intelligence, consulting, and international trade. Matthew led the development of a new business unit from 0 to 300 employees in the first 3 years through a mix of acquisition, open innovation, and organic initiatives by leading strategy, deals, integration, and CEO board level reporting. Forward thinking, Matthew is focused on creating value through open innovation and financial returns through investment in early stage, C through B startups, in autonomous systems, driverless vehicles, drones, robots, smart cities, and advanced manufacturing. Outside of the office, Matthew's a huge soccer fan and a photography lover. He gets it all done with a French-American perspective. So Matthew, off to you.
Thank you, Vlad, and hi, everyone. Hopefully we have a few more folks joining, otherwise you guys will have almost basically a tutoring session at this point. I'm going to share my screen, and you should be able to see it right now. So as Vlad mentioned, I'm basically a veteran of the innovation sphere. I've been working on it for about 15 years around the world, really, frankly. Right now, I'm based in Chicago. I was in the Bay Area, around San Francisco for a few years. And I also teach innovation in Madrid, where I went to the business school myself and now teach there. So why are you here? I think I know the answer, but I think it's always helpful to understand, when we have folks that come from large companies versus folks that come from, smaller organization where maybe they were the founders or something like this, you have to sort of level set and realize that innovation is something that needs to come from within and be really sort of like a true calling, realizing that it is likely very necessary in your industry and is not just something that you can say that you do. There's a lot of posturing, a lot of posing, a lot of people pretending to do innovation. And I want to make sure that that's not the case with you guys. So hopefully this little comic here is not representative of why you're attending this. Hopefully your pointy-haired boss is not the person sending you to this workshop and telling you you have to attend, period. Why am I here? I'm here because, as I mentioned, I've really dedicated my career thus far to all matters of innovation. I was actually an entrepreneur when I was in my teens. At 19 years old, I started a company back in France, the first retail shop for Asian furniture that had even a website. That was in 2001, 2002. And, that was even big chains didn't have websites to sell furniture. So it's been in my DNA, and I've tried to keep a layer of innovation on all three tracks of my life. The entrepreneurial track, which is right now in full bloom because I'm mostly an independent contractor, consultant on innovation and growth. But even in my career, which would be the blue track here, where my market research and competitive intelligence background was always around innovation, knowing on behalf of Coca-Cola, what is Pepsi working on behalf of John Deere, what is Caterpillar working on, things like that. And then going all the way to sort of like where the bleeding edge of innovation is, I did 7 acquisitions of various software companies in order to transform a traditional service company into a software business, and later on started a corporate venture fund. So that's sort of the gist of why I'm here and where does the perspective that I bring come from. A little bit of academia, a little bit of entrepreneurship, and a little bit of corporate. Now, the other thing that I want to avoid, I want you guys to be the host muted me.
Yes. Sorry. I just was ready, was leading the for Francesco, and then I just fat fingered. I'm sorry.
That's okay. No worries. I noticed immediately. We talked a couple slides ago, like, why are you here, and making sure you are here for the right reason. And now I want to talk about what I want to get out of today. I want to make sure that after today, you guys don't fall into a trap that we've seen many times in history. Now, some of you may remember the objects that are on this slide, especially on the left-hand slide. What happened is that at a point in time, I think it was the 60s, there was a technology breakthrough. Brushless DC motors became very easy to make, very cheap to make at scale. And so what happened is we had a transformation, not a digital transformation, we had a motor transformation where every industry, every company in the world started realizing motors are now very cheap. Should we cram a motor into our product? And that's how we ended up with some products like an electric carving knife, an electric can opener, an electric knife sharpener. It was basically, if you think you can cram a motor into your product, just do it. Now, some of those products don't really make a lot of sense, right? If you look on the left-hand side, most of these don't really exist anymore, or they're very niche product because we realize, yes, you can put a motor into a knife and make it an electric knife, but is that really helpful? Not really, so you shouldn't do it. On the right-hand side, though, you can see that transformation, the motor transformation has really brought some particular goods that maybe make sense in some markets, maybe not in some others. And so if you look at the electric tea kettle, maybe not popular in every country in the world, maybe not popular in every market, but definitely a success. The rice cooker, not very popular where I come from in France, not even that popular in the US, but very popular in other cultures, including Asia. So transformation is somewhere on that nuanced spectrum where some things are going to make absolutely no sense, like an electric can opener that's just wasteful use of technology. Some things will make very limited sense, and something will make sort of like sense only in some particular context. Now, what I want to avoid is any of you today to end up doing something as dumb as what I have collected on this slide. Today, we're going through digital transformation, and just like people were trying to put motors into everything a few decades ago, now people are trying to put digital in everything because digital transformation. I'm sure you've seen some of these products. Here are some of my favorites. Digital transformation in the toothbrush industry by actually ironically adding a motor to it, which turns out is a pretty good use, but also adding Bluetooth into it. A Bluetooth-enabled hairbrush, the ability to order a new fridge using Alexa. I guess you don't need to see the fridge. You just say, Alexa, just buy a fridge for me. That sounds suboptimal, if I dare say. Or a Bluetooth egg minder that you can check on your phone how many eggs are currently in your fridge. So my goal, I will consider myself at least mildly successful if none of you end up doing anything quite as dumb as this today. And that's what we're going to try to set up. Now, in a little bit more structured way, to have a little bit more of a frame for what we're going to work on, here are 5 things that I want to have as an agenda. Number 1, we'll talk about some frameworks, like giving you some tools to actually help with ideation and innovation in general. Number 2, I'll talk about how digital transformation and innovation in general is everyone's job, and I'll give some example of what I mean by that. And eventually, we'll move into more practical. 1, how do you actually execute innovation and measure it? Because that's always a question that comes up. And we'll learn that a lot of that rests on people, and therefore we'll talk about the people side of innovation. And eventually, as a closing note, we'll talk about 3 hard truths of innovation. We'll have a couple of breakouts as well that I think, depending on the amount of folks that we have, we may do them as one big group, or we may actually split up. We'll see that when we get to it. So first of all, I want to start with a quote that I really like, and ironically does not come from the innovation world whatsoever. This woman, Sarah von Brenak, I think it's pronounced somewhere like this, was a philanthropist, an author, etc. Has nothing to do with innovation, but this quote really resonated with me and will color every comment I will make after this. The quote goes that the world needs dreamers and the world needs doers, but above all else, what the world needs is dreamers that do. And why am I saying this is because there is a real challenge, especially in larger organization, in actually getting innovation done. And one of the reasons for that is because you have a lot of people that see themselves as innovators, but are just dreamers. They have big plans, big ideas, they can talk a good game, but actually don't do much. And then you have other people that are great at executing things, people that tend to be very operational, and rarely, unfortunately, do they dream big, or do they have the ability, because of the KPIs, because of their utilization rate being already pretty tapped out, to actually envision the future. And so what you need to do as innovators is do both. You can be an innovator and just be an idea person, and you can't also be an innovator if you never have the time to dream, to really think about what it is that you should be doing. Now, I'm not going to waste your time with 3 very key frameworks. I just want to say that they exist and also make a common comment about them. I am very convinced that you've heard of this, Lean Canvas. If that's not the case, I would suggest you Google it. It's not a bad process, and there's definitely things to learn. But essentially, this is a reasonably good framework for the execution part of it. As you're moving towards creating a business out of an idea, this is a potentially helpful tool for you guys. On the flip side of that, design thinking is actually a more helpful tool on the ideation phase. And so when you're trying to come up with what ideas to do, what to work on, and also making sure that this aligns with the needs of your stakeholders and your clients, this is a framework that I also invite you to, this is something you can have a 3-day workshop on either one of those two frameworks. That's not the goal for today, but this is something that you could and should look into it if you're not familiar, as a way to level up your innovation game. So just one of the, I would say innovation as it's a 3 legs tool, and those the first 2 legs. And the final leg is around the agile methodology, which is actually really execution driven, as agile is all about the idea of breaking down the tasks that used to be done sort of like as a monolithic waterfall into smaller, more digestible things that allow for iteration, that allow for more frequent reviews of the progress, more frequent feedback, et cetera, et cetera. Unlike the first 2 that are really tied to one company or one person, the agile methodology came from some sort of, they're not nameless, but came from a group of engineers that was not particularly famous. And it's a philosophy that therefore is a little bit more organic. One of the dangers with agile, as well as with the other 2 frameworks, is what I would call cargo culting. And that brings me to my next point. The challenge with these frameworks, well, you need to know those 3, and you really would have a hard time doing any credible innovation without some flavor or some influence from the 3 things we talked about. Using them, adapting them to your needs is a lot more complicated and a lot more unglamorous than it seems. I have been in countless meetings, whether it was agile meetings, daily stand-ups, scrums, etc., that are absolute garbage because they're run poorly. It's just about making sure people shout the right acronyms, and there is no actual real thought be put into it as far as, are we doing it correctly, and should we even be doing it for this particular project or process? Likewise, I've been in countless meetings where everyone gets a lot of nice little sticky notes, puts them on the wall and all of that stuff, and we call that doing a lean canvas. So that's my key point, is that, well, you do need to understand those frameworks, and I really encourage you to learn those 3 if you learn any of them. You have to be cognizant of the fact that just having those merely doesn't do the job. Because really, this is what they're good for. The framework is just giving you a very, very rough foundation, making sure that you're drawing roughly the right thing, but the real work is going to be so tailored to your organization. It's going to require a unique set of skills that cannot be turned into a book that becomes a bestseller just by nature of making broad generalization, etc., versus applying your particular company and industry-specific expertise. By the way, I'm monitoring the chat on my screen, and feel free to also interrupt me at any point in time, unmute yourself and ask any questions. Very much want to make this as interactive as possible for you guys. Now, the bigger question is not so much how, because again, for how, I think most companies are good at doing things. They're good at executing. But when it comes to innovation, they could actually usually do reasonably well without the help of all those fancy frameworks and all the buzzwords that come with them. What's usually more problematic is not so much how to do innovation, but what to do. What are the things to focus on, etc. And while this also would be, a several-day workshop, there's a couple ways to do it that I think can be kind of interesting and fun. And so one of those we're going to do as a quick breakout. Now, the perspective that I want to bring is that really, when you think about innovation, especially digital transformation, is something that can be applied to any area of your business, whether it's the back office, the things that don't touch the clients ever, only support functions, etc., all the way to the more obvious things like sales and marketing, and obviously your product. And there's actually a way that I found that is reasonably helpful, at least just for, triggering some discussions, is to play Battlefield and a Battleship. If you play Battleship, and I took this game because it's, I think, cross-cultural, and hopefully every single one of you, regardless of where you're from, are familiar with this game. I'm going to present to you a quick way to really force thinking around innovation and what could potentially be done. The underlying concept here is as well that constraints are very helpful for innovation. When you read about, documents from McKinsey and others, everything is very broad, very buzzwordy, and it's not particularly helpful. They'll write about how you can do a digital transformation to disrupt your business, and then they'll throw
You need
five
to be
more
more
words.
agile.
Right, you need to be more agile. They'll throw five more words that, could mean really anything and could be applied to anyone. And so what I want to encourage you to do is to think in terms of constraints, of maybe the things that you have control or the things that you know in your industry. And so we're going to play a little round of Battlefield, and you will in your separate groups. And the way you do that is as follows. On the left-hand side, the rows represent various macro trends. Those are things that are happening. Those are things about which people are writing those dumb articles about. Blockchain, augmented reality, sustainability, robotic process automation, RPA, or robotics themselves, actual physical robots. And then on the columns, those are various functions in a typical company. Now, if you happen to be in HR, for instance, if you are a human resource professional, you could do this just for HR and start breaking it down even more. Okay, well, recruiting versus retaining versus training, leadership and development, you could really break that down any way you want. But the idea is you use this as a way to force yourself to think through, okay, well, I know this may not make perfect sense, but let's try. Let me throw it out and see what can I come up with using AI for the legal function. All right, well, why not? AI contract reviews. Instead of having a paralegal, which, in the US probably makes at least $100 an hour, review a lengthy contract, maybe AI could do a first pre-read and highlight the areas of concern. Okay, well, that's one idea. What about robotics and facilities? Maybe I don't need to pay people to clean up my office. Maybe I can have robot vacuum cleaners and robot that collect the trash in the office. Let's do a couple more. Let's see. This one is behind your pictures on my screen. Blockchain and my security team. Well, maybe blockchain-backed employee ideas and badges. I don't know why you would want to do that, but that's just the point of the exercise, right? Is to just come up with the various ideas. Robotic process automation of the forecasting process. I don't know if any of you have ever worked with FP&A people, but this is a very complicated, very tedious process. Each of the different divisions and business unit works from a spreadsheet, and then somebody has to consolidate all that. That's something that could likely be automated. I think by now, at least I hope, if you have enough coffee in you, and I'm sure you have enough neurons. I don't know if you have enough coffee in you, but if you have both of those things, you probably get the concept. And what I would like to propose is just a quick 10-minute breakout where you can throw a virtual dart. Don't throw a dart at your computer screen. I will not be held liable for the mistake that happens if someone does that. And come up with a few things. Sort of use that framework to force you to think about something that doesn't seem to make sense. I'm sure people in HR or accounting very rarely think about a macro trend like drones. But maybe there's something to be said for that. Maybe there is something. Maybe you could use drones to do facilities tour, so that when you have potential new employees, people that can fly a drone around your office and get an idea for the culture and all of that. Doesn't matter what it is, just use it as a tool to have some fun. And so, Vlas, do you want to help me with how to split up the groups and all of that?
Yes. I'll just go and quickly upload the this macro trend so everyone have that available, and then we can go from there.
Good.
Yeah, so let me just go really quick, put this one up here, and then I will go and add the file from the Google Drive really quick. And then
well, Vlas does that. Anyone has any questions that unclear for anyone? And again, you can go a lot deeper. Each of those functions could be broken down into all of the different sub departments, etc. So whatever is most helpful for you. Or maybe there's a macro trend that you hear about, like renewable energies or whatever. This is just the idea of forcing a particular template to have discussions that otherwise wouldn't happen.
All right, awesome. So I'm setting it to 10 minutes and then opening the rooms, and you should have the picture in the chat. So please go and download that one so you can go and see it, and then we'll go from there.
All right. Vlad, am I going to be in the room, or should I just wait for people to come back?
I mean, if you're welcome to join, I assigned you, so you're welcome to join. One that's saying, hey, you know what? We're 95% complete. You can actually fly around and see what's happening.
Yeah, good example. Anyone from the final group? How many groups did we have? 3, right?
And we're looking for the room 2. It was Barbara, Francesco, Robert. So anyone from that group want to share room 2?
Yeah, sure. Francesco, do you want to go, or Barbara?
Yeah. Basically, we looked at various dimensions. We started out with artificial intelligence and strategy. And basically, we come out with it is an option based on the fact that, thanks to artificial intelligence, we can facilitate strategic decision based on past scenarios on the basis of how in certain similar scenarios human intelligence has reacted and what was the outcome around that. And then we also looked at augmented reality and virtual reality for marketing and sales, and we thought this could be an option because you could bring more flavor to the final customer in case of both marketing and sales, other than a simple Zoom conference or any other mean of communication in that sense. Robert, do you want to add to that?
Sure, happy to. We also came up with around legal and blockchain, the intersection there being smart contracts. That's you can combine with that. Then we also thought you could also use blockchain in finance. And we also looked at finance and AI for treasury management, portfolio construction, and optimization. And we had finance as well with an intersection in robotic processing and automation. And then we also dealt with, I think, marketing in AI as a possible solution. And we also had facilities and drones for inspecting facilities and maybe using that to inspect factories or warehouses and so forth. I think that's in essence what we came up with.
Cool, thank you. Something tells me you guys didn't throw your darts at random. I think sometimes it can be more fun to just really do it randomly, and you land on something very awkward that can be also helpful. But good work, everyone. And I hope that you found the exercise. It's super helpful, super easy. You can do it really, very easily. It doesn't require a whole lot of training. You will figure it out very quickly. So thanks for partaking in it. All right, let's move on to section 2. Section 2 is going to be about realizing that digital transformation is everyone's job. Actually, this exercise was also a somewhat of a transition into that, as you realize that really can be applied to literally any particular department of the organization. But the idea here is to explain why collaboration is needed more than ever, and that will be a segue into the concept of open innovation. Now, if you think about this product, I worked for almost a decade at UL, a company that does product safety testing, and so the toaster is sort of near and dear to my heart as a product we always use as an example. UL would basically test the toaster and making sure it's not going to burn your house down. What happened while I was there and why actually my job became really interesting and I did so many acquisition and venture investments is because we realized that even the simplest products are now becoming very, very complicated. This simple toaster is potentially something that's evolving to contain a performance coating that is anti-fingerprints. And that might be, a performance material, some kind of plastic that has a different flammability rating than the original plastic or metal. It may have a high-tech OLED screen. It may have nanosilver, which would be a biomaterial almost that prevents bacterial growth. It could be voice activated or triggered by Bluetooth or 5G or whatever. But more importantly, there's also potential for the toaster to innovate the business model. You could sell a toaster at a loss. It costs you $15 to make. You sell it for $5, but you bundle it with a premium toast monthly delivery. That sounds kind of familiar. A lot of companies are doing that nowadays. You could sell the usage data of the toaster to, I don't know, jelly and jam companies. And, this is sort of ridiculous examples, but this kind of shows you the types of things that's happening across the world in almost every industry. One other way to look at this, and that's the bottom of my slide right here, is IP, intellectual property. This is a place where you can really see that evolution. Patent application are up an insane amount, growing much faster than GDP. 3 million new patents are filed every year. 2/3 of them are actually in Asia. So this is kind of the world that we live in. And this is why overall, you can imagine if you're a toaster manufacturer, how hard is it going to be to attract top talent to work on your OLED screen when they can work for an actual TV manufacturer or laptop manufacturer or something like this? And that's one of the challenges that then fosters the need for open innovation, collaboration, and not necessarily trying to reinvent it. Go ahead.
Nee, ich hole dich ab um 7:10.
Oh, sorry. Even if you think at the leadership level, this is a McKinsey analysis that sort of explained, the different aspects of strategy, decision-making, and sort of, pretty framework, like they are the secrets to do. And it explains sort of like how you touch your customers, right? You have your customer experience and then the products themselves. How do you get the product into their hands? That's the distribution and marketing. And then you have some internal aspect of, your corporate control, your risk optimization. And in reality, when you think about digital transformation, this is a comprehensive picture, but the problem is that it's different job titles. This bubble right here is mostly the purview of the CTO. This bubble right here is mostly the purview of the chief marketing officer. This is going to be your CFO, and it's going to be your COO, chief operating officer. And so the challenge is, how do you really align your digital transformation strategy when so much of it relies on intelligent management of the overlap? So that's one of the big challenges. And that's why you need to recognize that digital transformation cannot happen in just your silo. If you work in marketing, you can't just think that digital transformation is only within the scope of marketing. Are there things that you can do that only apply to marketing? Sure, probably. Are those the things that are going to be most transformative, most impactful? Likely not. So collaboration, both within the firm and with outside parties, is more important than ever in the context of making the beautiful toaster. But that brings up to really this final sort of high-level concept. We talked about those execution frameworks, things to get work done. This one is a little bit more philosophical, but in my mind, quite a bit more helpful, actually. Open innovation is a term and concept that was coined in 2004 by Henry Chesbrough of Berkeley. And this is the idea that your innovation funnel, and a funnel is representative of, you have many things at the beginning, very wide, and then over time, you lose some of them. You lose some of them to improper budgeting. You lose some of them because the research and development, or the market research doesn't support it anymore. Traditionally, what happens in your innovation funnel is that things die out, and you may start with, let's say, for keeping it simple, 10 innovation ideas, and after a couple of years, only 3 of them survive. Open innovation is the idea that doesn't work anymore. First of all, the world is moving too fast. You can't just have 10 ideas. You need 20, 50, 100. And second of all, it is too expensive to do 100 ideas and think that only 10 of them are going to survive. So this model is explaining that you need to do a couple things. One is to widen your funnel, that left part of it. You can't just rely on the blue dots that are your internal ideas. You need to also bring an external technology base, whether that comes from academia, whether that comes from co-opetition with some of your competitors, whether it comes from startups or whatever else. So you widen essentially the entry point of the funnel, and you go from 10 ideas to 100. And then you need to also keep that funnel open. Traditionally, it was a very close process, and very close in the sense that it was even literally companies didn't really talk about their research and development. They didn't really want the outside world to know what they were doing. And so really the ideas that died, they remain in that funnel. That's all they were. Now the idea is on the upside, the upper part of this funnel, you can see sometimes you may abandon something before the end of the funnel. You started working on some new technology and you realize, you know what, you're not the right firm to do it. Maybe your market is shifting a little bit. Maybe your interests are shifting or your strategy is shifting. And so the idea is that you don't have to lose all of the investment that went into it. You can license out maybe some of the IP you created, or you can potentially spin out as a separate company some of the work that you did. That's open innovation. On the bottom part of this funnel, you can see another aspect of it, which is to actually bring things into your funnel from the outside after the entry point. Maybe you realize that you should have started doing work with any one of those things we just talked about, RPA, AI, blockchain, etc. Maybe you should have started 3 years ago. And if you start today from scratch, it might be too long before you reach the point where it's actually helpful. And so you can do external technology insourcing. You can license a patent, you can partner with someone, you can acquire a company and recognize that your innovation doesn't always have to start from A and go to Z. You can start from point F, L, M, whatever it is, by way of open innovation. Make sense? Any questions on that?
Not right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Moving on. Now, how do you go from a pretty slide with a super high level philosophical concept into making this a reality? This is where strategy comes into play. Strategy, which has been my job title for a long time and has been a major source of frustration because everyone and their mother on LinkedIn also says strategy is a skill that they have. In reality, very few people have a real strategy as a skill. Strategy is a discipline of orchestration. Almost anything that you can think of can make sense. But in reality, strategy is the discipline of choosing things that make sense as a whole, where your decision A and your decision F make sense together. They create that 1 + 1 = 3 type of thing. And also where you do it in a way that is aligned with where you're trying to go as an organization, what you have realistically as resources, and maybe also as resources you could have if you raise more money or raise more debt or whatever, and really doing all of this together. Strategy to me is being a chef, is the ability to open the fridge and see what you have and make the most of what you have based on a vision of who your guests are. And unfortunately, a lot of people know how to cook one dish and think that makes them strategists. And so that's what I really want you guys to think about is that analogy of orchestrating and what works for someone what someone was able to do with their tools and the content of their fridge in their company is not something you can necessarily replicate. You have to make it your own. That is what strategy is to make those ideas and their execution your own, make them make sense for your organization and not anybody else's. Now, how do you do that? There is really an approach that I've crafted that follows, since we had quite a few examples in finance, that follows really the portfolio model of how you could approach it. An innovation strategy is just like an investment portfolio. Your investment portfolio at age 50, if you work in a career where it's relatively stable, is going to look very different from the investment portfolio of somebody at age 30 in a career track where there are lots of ups and downs, maybe real estate or something like this. And so what you need is really have diversity. Diversity, I quantify across 3 dimensions. 1 is going to be the types of innovation you do. 2 is going to be the approaches, and 3, the levels. And I'm going to walk you through what that means. Number 1 is the approaches. The approaches are sort of the activities, the tactical work. What is it that you are investing in, your time and or your money to make innovation happen? This today is an innovation approach. Your approach is to take a training program through Silicon Valley Innovation Center. It's a good approach, probably. Maybe some of you are already too mature and this is not as productive for you as it is for people that are less mature in their journey. But that's sort of the idea, right? You have to find a combination that works for you. Maybe you're at the stage where having a dedicated innovation team makes sense. Maybe you're at a stage where that doesn't make sense, but maybe you want to start doing maybe a hackathon. Tell your employees next Friday, nobody works on their normal jobs. You're all trying to create a solution to this particular problem. Maybe an innovation excursion like SVIC does phenomenal ones where they bring a group of folks to Silicon Valley and have them do some of these events in person, different courses, different visits, etc., etc. You really have to find what works for you. But that's the first dimension is what are the different things that you're doing to become better at innovation. The second facet is the types of innovation. And I think this one typically makes intuitively more sense. Oftentimes, when we think about innovation, we think about the obvious stuff, right? It's like, oh, it's a new product, adding more features, all of that sort of very obvious things. Obviously, the iPhone, like all that stuff that's always associated with innovation. But really, in the same way that I force you to think about what could you do if you had to really cram blockchain into marketing, this is a helpful frame to think about what are the things that we could do to innovate the profit model. One classic example is obviously moving to subscription or things like that, different forms of payment. So really by spreading your innovation, not all around your product or your services, but thinking, can we innovate the channels that we're using to reach our customers? Can we innovate how we engage with the customers once they've purchased the service or the product? All those things are equally deserving of your focus, are equally deserving of a little slot in your innovation portfolio. And then finally, the 3 levels. I think this is one where most people I've seen that slide before, so I use this little cartoon first to kind of explain what I mean by that, is just how ambitious, just how bold are you trying to go? Are you just adding a razor blade to the razor? Are you just making a copy of what somebody else is doing, et cetera, et cetera? In reality, what I mean by that is just how far are you going from your existing product and services and your existing markets? So on the x-axis here, sorry, it shouldn't be business models and process, it should be your markets. Are you doing a new product in your existing market, or are you doing a new product in a new market? That would be more of a disruption. This is like something that's going to really move your business. And so in here, just as with the other 2 dimensions, you need to be cautious. You need to have a little bit of everything. It is okay, although it's not going to land you on the cover of the New York Times. It is okay to do incremental innovation, to make the performance of your existing products just a little bit better, make the process by which you make them just a little bit cheaper. All of those things are okay, but they're only okay in a portfolio approach where you also have a few big bets, a few game changers that are going to take you from being a cargo company to being a mobility or transportation company, that type of thing. Any questions on this portfolio approach, innovation strategy, or do you guys want to move on to section 3? Checking the chat as well as your.
Sorry, if I may, if you're using the portfolio approach, let's say you're trying to create portfolio, how do you evaluate the risks associated with each of the innovative projects that you would want to do, as an example?
But typically, there's actually the level of innovation is mostly aligned with risk. And the farther away you are from the bottom left, the more risky it is. And so if you were to give a success chance, things that are going to be near the bottom left have a 90% chance of success. If you make your product a little bit better, 90% chance you'll be able to do it on time, to do it in scope, and 90% chance if customers will understand it well enough, will be interested in that new feature. If you do things over there, it is a lot more of a gamble whether or not people will be interested. And so your success rate, your risk factor is going to be a lot higher. And that's just like you would do in finance, right? If you go in bonds, you're going to have a much higher rate of confidence, but lesser returns than if you go into high growth tech stocks, for instance. Does that answer your question, or were you looking for something else?
No, that's fair. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? All right, moving on then. Now that we talked sort of high level theory and all of that, I want to cover a little bit more on the executing and measuring innovation. So There is a gentleman that some of you may be familiar with, named is Peter Drucker. Peter Drucker was the grandfather of management, who wrote a ton of books that used to look really cool on your shelf if you worked at McKinsey or GE or any of those companies in the late 90s, early 2000s. Nowadays, I think probably a little bit less relevant. What I have against this gentleman is that this particular saying, what gets measured gets managed, while very good for many things, is, in my opinion, terrible for innovation. And unfortunately, it became such a cultural dogma in management that it is nevertheless applied to innovation in quite a few occasions. Now, a lot of consultants have attempted to measure innovation, and my favorite guys at Accenture have spent countless days, weeks, months, and years undoubtedly creating frameworks to do it. And I've summarized all of it right here in a nice little word cloud that spells exactly what I think about it. I've literally read dozens of their papers, watched some of their videos, and for fun, collected all the text and put that into an analysis tool that creates, this word cloud where the bigger a word, the more prevalent it is in the text. And you can sort of see everything is very vague. Nothing is particularly helpful. Now, other people have tried a less pretentious, more practical approach to measuring innovation, and I think it's equally wrong. On the left-hand side, you have people that have tried to measure activities as a way of measuring the quality of innovation. And on the right-hand side, you have people that are trying to measure the outcomes of innovation. Now, to make it more of a simple concept to understand, I'm using this painting as the old guitarist by Pablo Picasso, and I'm trying to see, could we measure how innovative this painting is by measuring the activities or the outcome, or is that something that misses the point entirely? And so in this case, the activities would be like measuring the number of brushstrokes. In a corporate setting, that could be measuring the number of innovation projects, the amount of paint used, or the number of hours spent on it. In companies, I see things like number of patents that we applied for and things like that. On the right-hand side, you would be measuring the outcome using, traditional metrics. How good is the perspective? I don't know. It doesn't look very good to me. Like, it doesn't seem to have that real like 3D depth perception. So it must be a terrible painting for sure. A variety of colors. It's mostly blue with a little bit of brown for the guitar. That doesn't seem like a great painting to me. And so you can see the problems here, right? You would do the same thing on the corporate side. You would try to measure for like just one particular metric, like revenue or gross margin for a new product that's not yet optimized. And so that's my problem with measuring innovation the traditional way. What I'm proposing instead is to essentially incorporate a little bit of extra time, a little bit of extra steps in how to measure innovation project. On the top of that slide, with a little cross next to it, is the things not to do. This is what we do for almost everything else, right? Things that are more finite, things that we know. We set a goal, and the goal is, usually some kind of number. We measure against that goal, and then we take actions, corrective actions, or things like that, based on whether we meet the goal or not. The problem, I argue, is with innovation, we don't know what the right goal is. If you're developing a new product or new service, you don't know how you have a vision for what's going to happen. It's going to make the customer experience better, but you don't know if that's going to improve your retention or the average spend, or maybe the rate of referral, etc. You have no idea, I would say. And so what I'm proposing is that you actually do a couple things before you go into the normal goal setting. The first one is you measure a ton of things. Anything that you think could potentially be affected by your innovation project, you start measuring. Then after some time, you assess which metrics actually have good quality. Which ones can you reliably collect? Because a metric can be good in and of itself, but it's very hard, or it has a lot of variability. It actually doesn't make for a really helpful metric. And then third step, you assess which ones correlate with the strategic intent. You knew why you did this project. You didn't know exactly which goal it would move, but you were confident that it was the right thing to do. Look at your metrics and the 20 or whatever you've collected, and figure out which one or two end up being the right ones to focus on. And then you can move on the traditional goal setting. Now, this is going to vary industry by industry. Sometimes that time that you want to buy yourself before committing to a traditional goal setting process is literally just days. Sometimes it might be weeks, months, years. It really depends on what kind of industry you're in. But the idea is to resist the temptation to, from day one, set a goal that is tied to a traditional KPI without giving yourself the option of seeing what are the other things that this innovation initiative can actually move the needle on. Questions, comments, pushback, all of which are welcome, especially the latter makes for more fun discussions. All right, moving on then. One caveat to that is you want to make sure that whatever metrics and KPIs you use are practical. It's a common trope in creating incentives for people that if you make the incentives too hard to understand, it really doesn't change behavior. And so you want to make sure that you pick KPIs that people that then are going to execute on them can actually understand. If you tell your people, we're going to measure you on enterprise value, it's very hard to say like, okay, what am I doing as an accountant that actually drives enterprise value? You need to make it relatable and also not so specific that it's very difficult to manage. Got it?
Question on that.
Yeah, please.
Any practical guidance on how to get there? I think we're all struggling with this KPI determinations, KPI setting, and so forth. Any good experience how to how to get?
So the issue, I think everyone gets that, but sometimes what happens is then people do a bottom-up approach to KPIs, and they're like, okay, well, the accountants, what should be their KPIs? Okay, what about the FP&A people, the financial planning and analysis people? What about the corp dev team? Like, and I'm just doing finance right now, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe the CFO will have their own goal. She will have whatever other goals, return on capital invested, et cetera, et cetera. I would actually argue it needs to be sort of top down and making sure that with every time you go layer down, you can still sort of align them and that nobody works on a KPI that cannot be tied to a bigger KPI for their manager. And so you try to break it down to a level where people are really in control of it. Mm-hmm. Let's say, Uwe, you worked in cargo, right? And so your goal is, I'm just making this up, right? On-time delivery. Mm-hmm. But the person in the warehouse that drives the forklift has very limited impact on the overall on-time delivery. But the 5 people between you and him or her, you break down that goal on-time delivery, then that becomes, you break that down into goals that kind of stack one on top of each other. That would be the best practice.
Okay. Thank you.
And don't do it the other way around where, each of them has their own goal and you realize they don't necessarily align. They're all good individually, but they don't make sense together.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Good question, though. So that actually, it's a good segue into, managing people, because that's what it's all about at the end. Innovation is all about managing people. The good news is that managing people is always the same, roughly. Doesn't matter if you're managing them for an innovation team or for a cargo company. It comes down to the following. You have to get the right people, either by promoting them, recruiting them, or taking them from your competitors. Then when you have the right people in the building, or remote, I guess, nowadays, you want to make sure that they have the right things to do the work. So you train them and you give them the right tools, train and empower. And then once they're in the right seats with the right, equipment, you need to manage them, lead them to results so that they understand, what is the vision and what does that translate to. Now, how do you manage people specifically for innovation? Because since we talked about, management is that last layer of like getting people to actually perform. There's 3 dimensions to it. Number 1 is culture. Number 2 is incentive. And number 3 is structure. And I'll share with you some best practices for all of those with regard to innovation specifically. Number 1 is structure. This is what you don't want. Innovation, it's been proven time and time again, works best when it's decentralized. And yet, a lot of people that I work with, a lot of my clients come to me, and this is kind of what they have. They have somebody with a cool title, Chief Digital Officer, Chief Transformation Officer, and then a bunch of people that are all in that same silo of the org chart, all with different cool titles. Sometimes there's a ninja or a guru in there or something like this. But at the end of the day, There's nobody that's accountable to anything, nobody that relates to an actual P&L and income statement of any of the business units. That's not what you want. So avoid that. Innovation works best when, yes, perhaps you have a couple folks that own it at a centralized level. Although, frankly, I think it should be the prerogative of some of the existing C-suite and doesn't require a separate C-level person. And then you want innovation to be distributed in your organization, different levels of the P&L, different levels of the org chart to have their innovation champions. The second aspect is around culture. And so when you want to have innovation as a key element of your company, you need to create what's called a fail-safe, safe to fail organization. I did the exact opposite of what I was supposed to do. Safe to fail is the idea that you create a culture where people have the feeling, and the feeling must be genuine because it's true, have the feeling that it's okay to take some risks. And as long as they're small risks, there will be no negative consequences for failing, especially if you can come back with a learning that helps the next person or you, if you try again, not fail. The biggest challenge I see there is a lot of people, just like myself 12 seconds ago, misinterpret that. And instead of doing safe to fail, they do something called fail safe. Now, fail safe is an engineering redundancy sort of term. Safe to fail, if I'm going to use a analogy here, and please stick with me. If our goal is for one of our employees to walk on a high wire between two tall buildings, just like in this picture, a safe to fail culture will be the culture where we tell her, because it appears to be a woman here, first practice 2 inches of the ground on a big rope, and then do it 1 foot above the ground, and then 2 meters above the ground, et cetera, et cetera. That's the right way to have an innovation culture. And also to tell her, if you fall, it's okay. We will support you. We'll pay for your medical benefit if you hurt yourself. And we will learn. We will learn, like, why did you fall? Do you need maybe a stick to help you maintain balance, etc.? Got it. Fail-safe, which most companies do, is actually to build a lot of redundancy, would be to build a high wire from day one between the 2 tallest buildings in town, but instead, rent the building, so it costs several $1 million, but give her a parachute, build a swimming pool, put some safety nets, et cetera, et cetera. And so one is the right way to do it because you will learn a lot, it will be fast, it will be cheap. The other one also feels safe, but is absolutely the wrong way to do it. And the final aspect is around incentives. I like to argue that incentives, and that would be bonuses, performance, et cetera, are not needed, and that innovation itself should be the right incentive. You want people to want to do innovation. You don't want to get people to want to do innovation because it triggers a bonus. But generally speaking, there's something that's important to understand. This is the Maslow pyramid of needs. This is widely accepted as a psychological representation of how humans feel. We typically start our day wondering, okay, are my physiological needs met? Do I have food, water, and a shelter? And then eventually, once we have all those things done, what really drives us as humans is that need for self-actualization. Like, am I actually living my best life? Am I being the best version of myself, right? If you translate that to managing millennials or Generation Z, this is like FUD, fear, uncertainty, and death. You don't want to manage that way. That's a terrible way to get people to say, I need you to do this innovation project because otherwise I'm going to fire you. A slightly better but not great way is FOMO, fear of missing out. Is telling them we need to do it because everybody else is doing it. The better way to manage and motivate people for innovation is this one, self-actualization, or in modern days, YOLO, you only live once. And it is your opportunity to transform this company. You want to motivate people by giving them the idea that this is a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. You could be the one that turns this company, sorry, Uwe, I'm going to keep picking on you, but you can be the one that turns this company from a cargo company to a mobility company, to a on-demand, whatever. This is what you want. You don't want to motivate people by saying, you need to do this, otherwise we're going to go bankrupt.
Yep.
And then if you manage mules or donkeys, you have the stick or the carrot. I recommend the carrot. So we're going to do a final breakout, and that breakout is going to be assessing culture. We're going to talk about the culture of the organization. This is what we're going to use. I'm going to need you to think about your company and give it a score on a scale going to -3 to +3. And you can be anywhere in between, right? You can be -1, +1 for every one of those things. You're going to read the statement and be like, okay, in my company, ideas come from internal beliefs. That would be a -3 versus ideas come from external inspiration. Maybe we read about the market or we saw that a different industry is moving in that direction. I have that feeling this is what's going to happen in my industry. In that case, you would give yourself a +3 here. And so we're going to break out for, let's try maybe 7 or 8 minutes just to be cognizant of time. Go through this and keep tabs on your score. Everyone can do it individually, actually, no need to do it in group. And then we will debrief. So I will shut up for 6 minutes.
Yeah, so please take a screenshot of what is happening right here, right now, and then I will go and recreate the rooms.
Actually, you know, Vlad, I think we probably don't need the rooms just to be cognizant of time.
Yeah.
Let's have everyone do it individually. I'm going to remain on that slide. Do it for yourself. And just do it. Everyone does it for themselves. And then when everybody's ready, we'll do a collective debrief.
Okay, sounds good. Let's start.
And usually what that means is that your company and your industry overall, it's very rare that I have someone from a very forward-looking industry that ends up in this bracket. A lot of it is contextual to the environment in which you are. And you don't end up in this bracket unless your overall industry typically is a little bit innovation challenged. Now, when you start getting closer to 0, but still in negative, you start having aspects of culture where it's not so much just the industry that's to blame, but just your own culture tends to be quite traditional, and leadership approach to everything is kind of like rooted in like status quo. This is how it's always been done, etc., etc. Typically speaking, when you start switching into positive numbers, you start having something where you're not quite in best practice land just yet. But typically, to get to that point, you need at least some pockets of good innovation, whether it's the mindset towards taking risk or the mindset towards empowering people at all levels of organization. You have a few things going right for yourself by the time you get into those positive numbers. And so congrats to you if you ended up on the plus side of 0. Eventually, if you're in the higher number, 16 to 30, which is, I think the highest I've ever got was a 30, you're usually in pretty good shape. You're probably not discovering anything in this session. Unfortunately, hopefully, maybe you're having some fun anyway. But this is something like, innovation is relatively well understood in your company. You know what you're doing, and you can optimize around the edges. And then if you're higher than 30, I'm guessing you're not actually on Zoom, you're attending via Neuralink, it's streamed directly into your brain, and it's just you have nothing else to do because all of your work has been automated, and that's why you decide to attend sessions like this. Now, out of curiosity, I know, Uwe, you mentioned you ended up just around 1.5. Anybody has a particular score that they hit and wants to share if that feels kind of right, or maybe the scoring feels very wrong compared to how they feel about their company? Robert, you're unmuted. I'm going to pick on you.
No worries. Everyone picks up on me. It's okay. I have a score of 8.
Okay.
My score is 8. And I think generally, I think there's still traditional management style because of the act that governs our activities. So it's a bit constrained. The pockets of innovation that are there, I think we choose to do about 80% of what we do is what is contained in the Act. Then we use 20% of our resources to explore future opportunities. And if there are potential opportunities, then we try to influence legislation to enable to exploit those opportunities.
Good. No, thanks for chiming in. So, like I said, generally speaking, you're going to want to be in a positive score. That's going to be obviously a better thing than negative, but it's also a perfectly valid strategy. Your goal is not to be the most innovative company organization in the world. Your goal is to be the best organization that you can be. And sometimes that means a medium level of, I don't think you can be at a bad level of innovation and be the best version of your company. I just don't think that's possible nowadays. but I don't think everyone has to strive to be the most innovative company out there. So as long as you're in a positive area and you know where you want to improve and where you've made the conscious strategic decision that it's not a priority, you're in good shape. So that's sort of what I wanted you all to take away from that. Let's move forward unless you have any questions, just again to get a chance to wrap up and leave some room for questions. The final thing I wanted to cover with you is 3 hard truths about innovation, things that are rarely talked about. And so I try to make a point of bringing it up in every discussion that I have. Number 1 is the concept of loss aversion. Number 2 is how non-democratic innovation is. And number 3 is the concept of trade-offs. So first of all, starting with loss aversion. Loss aversion is the reason why a lot of companies don't do innovation. A lot of companies don't do innovation or don't do ambitious enough innovation because of this psychological bias that we have called loss aversion, where, and you can see here, this is usually applied to gambling and other things like that, investing as well. The idea is that on the x-axis, you have your losses or your gains, and we can think this is in dollars, for instance. And so if you're like about, half an inch away, let's say it's $5. And so on the other side, that would be minus $5. The human brain works in such a way that the joy you get out of gaining $5 is half of the pain that you get from losing $5. And because innovation is very risky and has a lot of odds of failure, you think that, okay, if a lot of my projects are going to fail and I'm going to lose $5 every time, that is a lot of pain I'm going to feel. In reality, joy and pain are completely in your head. Loss and gain, you have control over. And you know that if you do 9 projects that lose $5 and you stop them when they've lost $5, you just need 1 project that's going to make you $50, and that's a net gain. And so what you need to do as innovators is abstract that joy and pain away. Be much more objective about the results of what you're doing, and be much more disciplined about how you assess whether or not innovation is worth your time, and not be so emotional about it. I don't know if it's a prospect theory. Okay, Vlas, thank you for thank you for answering the question there. So that was concept number 1. Concept number 2 that is rarely talked about in context of innovation is leadership. I don't believe you can do great innovation by committee. And I have a quote that I absolutely love by David Ogilvy, a famous ad man. It goes as follows: committees can criticize, but they cannot create. Search all the parks in your cities and you will find no statues of committees. And that's true. I mean, I have yet to see a statue somewhere in a park that represents 10 people around a boardroom, but I've seen a lot of statues of a single person, carrying a sword or something like this. And that's what you need in innovation. I know it's tempting to want to make sure you have buy-in from everyone and all of that, but that doesn't work. I mean, buy-in works, but designing by committee, having people making concessions saying, well, our vision was to do X, but to please Jane in marketing, we had to tone it down on that dimension, etc. That is the recipe to do something that just doesn't really excite anyone. And so you need to be a leader that is willing to stay away from consensus, but yet drive and lead with vision. Say, only half of you really like this version of the product or this idea, but I do need one. We're going to do it like that. We're not going to make some changes so that 60% of you like it. We're going to stick to 50% period, but I need 100% of you to be 100% committed to making this happen. That's what you need in innovation. And I know it is not the consensus to popular method, etc. Otherwise, this is what happens. If you design by consensus and you can fool yourself in thinking it's great, like, look, it only took 2 people 2 hours and look at how much surface area they painted on the right-hand side. Surely that's a much better use of resources than one man spending 4 years to paint a surface area that is smaller. And then the final one, the final third truth about innovation is trade-offs. Innovation almost always comes with trade-off. You cannot have your cake and eat it too. If you want a slimmer phone, you have to have crappier battery life. If you want to use a photo aging app that shows you what you will look like when you're 75, you have to give your personal data to some hacker in Russia or China or whatever. If you want an electric vehicle to be more sustainable, you may have to sacrifice on the range. So all those things are trade-offs. Now, trade-off can actually be a benefit. Here's an example of a trade-off that a company has made that worked very well. Anybody familiar with what that is? That image right there? It is a battery pack for a power tool. And so think about all the power tools that exist. I think they're going to show up on screen. Yeah. This is a circular saw. This is angle grinder, drill, flashlight. You have different power tools, and each of them, if you were to design the optimized battery for them, it would look very different. The shape would be different for each and every one of them. The power distribution would be different. Some of them would be low power for a very long time, like for a flashlight. Some of them would want to have very high power for very short time, like an angle grinder. And some of them would be in the middle, like a multi-tool. What this company, Milwaukee, did is they realized we're going to do the trade-off of making a battery pack that is not perfect for any of them, but is the same for all of them. And the benefit of that trade-off is that you have one charger to rule them all. That one charger can be used for every single product. Therefore, you have a simpler supply chain, which leads to economies of scale, a viral consumer ecosystem. If I know that Vlas has a Milwaukee toolkit, I'm more likely to do it because that way I can borrow from him if my battery dies or something. It's simpler to handle returns and exchanges. I go to the store, I say my battery pack died. They don't have to ask me 20 questions. Which tool, which version of the tool, from which year, it's all the same. And so it makes it a lot easier. And also, as we learned earlier today, constraints are helpful for design. And so if you tell your engineers, whatever tool you want to make, I really don't care, but it has to fit this battery pack, period. So wanted to give at least a few minutes left for questions. And if I don't know if you guys have a hard stop, if you have another talk right after this one, but if you do, by all means, please find me LinkedIn, Twitter, or my various websites. I very much welcome any follow-ups. I hope this came across as the fact that I'm relatively passionate about the topic. And so I would very much welcome the opportunity to engage with any of you outside of this time window.
Awesome. Awesome. Thank you, Matthew. Do we have any questions?
I don't.
All right. Awesome.
Very helpful session. Yeah. Very helpful tools.
Right. Awesome. All right. Okay. Okay. Our next speaker, Ed, is on the line.